Hey everybody, this is my first YouTube live, so I'm kind of excited about that. We'll see how it goes. I have no idea how my laptop does as far as audio. I probably should have tested that first, but I didn't. So here's what we have. What I wanted to do today is I wanted to go through types of books that are relevant for like learning about herbalism and foraging, things like that. Later, I would like to actually do a series of books where I review, or a series of videos where I review individual books and make recommendations, let you know my thoughts on them. Really valuable, not so valuable, what level of learning they're good for. But today, I just want to do an overview because if you get into researching herbalism or foraging, and by foraging, I mean where you go out and you are searching for edible or medicinal plants for your use. That's also commonly called wildcrafting. So, if you want to get into those and you don't really know much about it, then there's a lot of questions as far as what books are good and what can you use. So, I want to get into this real quick. I There are a lot of different types of books. I've broken them down into different um, I guess I'd say classifications, different styles of books, and each one of them has a different value. So I'm going to be speaking more to the beginner. We'll have some information relative to the person who's looking more to be an in-depth herbalist as well. But my primary goal is to talk to those people who are just getting into this, or maybe they've started getting into it, but they really don't know exactly what resources to find. Maybe you're a prepper and you're just realizing, oh, maybe I should learn some medicinal plants that would help me in a poo poo hits the air mover type scenario. Maybe you're someone who just loves the outdoors and you just simply want to, um, to get involved in something like this because it maybe matches your ethos, being outdoor centered or something like that. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into this and talk about some of the types of books. This is my own personal library, and there are a lot of books beyond the ones that I have here, but I'll show you what I have. And also, I just got these glasses. I've never used reading glasses before, so everything looks like a little funny. Everything moves when I turn my head. It's kind of weird. So, oh, and I have to show you because this is very important. If you're going to be a proper herbalist or forager, you have to have your nice glass of herbal tea, and you might consider it virtue signaling. Look what a good herbalist I am. I have my herbal tea, or it might just be because I thought that you all would be interested. This is cleavers to help clear my lymph system, get my lymphatic fluids moving as part of a detox. And then equisetum or horsetail, which is good for adding minerals. And mullein, which is anti inflammatory as well as antiviral, and it helps with lung health and sinus health. I've been having a few sinus issues. And then wild ginger, just for flavor. So, anyway, that is that. But mostly, I wanted to get that because I thought it'd be funny to show everybody that, oh, look what a good herbalist I am. I'm not drinking coffee for once. Okay, first type of book, um, field guides. Field guides are kind of notorious for being just really short, brief information, not super detailed, but they'll kind of get you going. So this one here, it just has some basic information on identifying the plant, really, really basic information on how the plant is used, and a picture. This is pretty typical for a field guide. So for this, it says edible. The root is edible any time of the year, stems only used in the spring. After the plant flowers, the seeds may be harvested. This is not getting into how you're going to prepare the root, how you're going to prepare the flowers, none of the nuances of really getting into use in that way. Horsetail, that's one of the things that's in my tea that I'm drinking right now. And then this particular field guide also has an area for poisonous plants. So, field guide. Um, in the 80s, this type of field guide was really popular. In fact, this one I've had, you can see all my bookmarks. This one I've had since probably 1989, 1990. So, Wild Food um, Trail Guide. So, and it also, similar to the other one, every herb just has one page, and you have a picture. It's really common for especially the earlier field guides to have illustrated pictures rather than photographs, and then a brief description of how that herb is used. These types of field guides are usually going to focus a lot more on edibility. The medicinal use is going to be very brief, and you'll need to search more to find information on especially deep medicinal uses. So here are some other field guides that I have, all of them from about the same era, late 80s, early 90s. This one is actually really good. Early uses of California plants. It's very small, so it doesn't have the volume of information that a lot of other field guides have, but this gets into ethnobotanical uses that I have not found in any other books. There is a lot of tribal information, tribal knowledge contained in this book. Here, let me hold it so that the authors also show up. There's a lot of information that shows up in this book that I have not found in other books. So sometimes I'll find plants in my other books, and after I feel like I've really researched them and I'm familiar with them, then I'll go to this one, especially if it's a plant that I know grows on the West Coast and down in California. Then I'll go to this one and I'll see if there's any other rare knowledge presented in this book that's not the other ones. Then we have Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants. Bradford Angier, really popular author from the 80s and into the 90s. Edible and Useful Plants of California. Again, it's a very regional book, but it has also some pretty interesting knowledge that isn't presented elsewhere. So those are field guides. Field guides are for the person who is just getting started, who just wants to learn what the plants are and get kind of a big picture idea of what plants they want to be looking for and what the general uses are. So in field guides, for example, that's where you'll find cattail, and you will see that cattail is good for food, it's good for crafts, it's good for all kinds of different uses. You can use it to make shelter, you can use it to make sleeping pads, you can use it to make hats and different types of clothing. You can eat it. So you'll get an idea from the field guides of those really general types of uses. But it's not going to go in depth and tell you, oh, here's how you harvest this one part of the cattail, and here's how you process it. Here's how you extract this one medicinal property. It's going to give you that really big picture of what the plant is and the types of uses that it's for. From there, you research deeper. Next category of plants or of books. These are your supermarket. Um, I don't even know what to call them. Supermarket books that you buy at the cash register. Really not worth it. I bought each of these because they were at the time fairly cheap. This one, of course, is just for identifying wildflowers of North America. So I thought, oh, there might be a few wildflowers in there that aren't in my other books, although my other books are pretty exhaustive. So that one was kind of a waste of money. These ones are specifically about herbs, and the value for these, I shouldn't say that they're worthless. The value for this type of little book, and look, they're just like these little, almost like pamphlets. They're just really thin and published by, I don't know, Reader's Digest or something. The value of these is sometimes you will find an herb that is mentioned in these that you don't find in other books. Or so you're just kind of mining them for small tidbits of information that you're not finding elsewhere. Really, these are not where you're going to start. These are, in my case, I purchased these because they were cheap at the time. It wasn't much of a cost. And I thought, well, what's the harm in buying it so that I can go through and maybe find some additional knowledge here that is not in my other books. In general, though, that hasn't been the case. These types of books also will tend to talk about herbs that you're going to be sourcing commercially. So it might be herbs that you buy as encapsulated supplements, herbs that are agriculturally grown and processed and made available in those ways. This type of book is not going to tell you about plants that you're going to go out and forage in the forest near you. So I would say of the different categories of books relative to herbs and foraging, this is the least useful category of book. Next, we're going to get into identification. Look at this pile of books. I'm not going to go through all of these books, but I just wanted to show you as you get into exploring plants and herbs, you always want to make sure, especially if you're wildcrafting or foraging, you always want to make sure that you are positively identifying the plants that you harvest. There are some plants that look very similar to other plants, and it can literally be the difference between life and death. You can pick a wild carrot and have a very tasty little carrot. You can also pick a wild carrot and unknowingly actually be harvesting a small new growth of poison hemlock that can kill you. Now, the experienced person can know that difference, but generally, there's a lot of difficulty with some plants in making those differences. I see there Anthony says, Sup, Dano. Hey, Anthony, good to see you. I don't know if you're still on or if that was a little bit ago, but this is my first live, so I'm not used to looking over on the side and seeing who's there and who's commenting. But anyway, so now I live in Oregon, so I have this book, Trees to Know in Oregon. It applies to me. It's definitely relative to where I live. National Audubon Society Field Guide to North American Wildflowers. Now, see, again, these books, they're not talking about medicinal uses or edible uses. They're just to identify plants. Once you identify a plant, then you can find out how it's used. So that's exactly what I do with these. I'm out foraging, looking around, and I'll see a wildflower that I've never paid attention to before, or a plant, a bush, a tree, whatever, that I've never really investigated before. And sometimes I'll just throw some of these books in a pack with me, and I have the books with me in the backpack. And so I'll just start figuring out right then and there what that plant is, what that tree is, etc. And then once I've identified it, then I can start looking through my books and on the internet to find out, is there a medicinal or edible use for this plant? Or is a plant useful for other things, different types of crafts and things to make and stuff like that. So, okay. I've got Pacific States wildflowers, again, relative to my region since I live on the West Coast. Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast. I'm going to do a book review later on, or I certainly hope to, where I dive into this one in more depth. I really value this book. Again, that is my bioregion. Since I live in Oregon, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. Flora of Steens Mountain. This generally applies to the Great Basin region at large, but it is a pretty narrow regional scope. Mountain plants of the Pacific Northwest. A guide to field identification, trees of North America. So it's very general, but still, even though it covers such a wide area, it's still useful. And and that's the thing. If you can find plant identification books for your area, prefer those books. Now, sometimes they're just written by local authors who have a very narrow scope of familiarity, but they just want to get something published that represents their area. And so sometimes they'll just be very thin books that don't really have a whole lot of information and they omit a lot of species. But if you can find field guides that represent a larger region, or they're good, meaty, thick books that represent like almost an exhaustive list of the species in your region, prefer local or regional books that will talk to what the plants are that you can expect to see where you live. This last one that I showed you, Trees of North America, there's a lot of trees from the East Coast and the Midwest and the South that don't apply to me. So most of this book is of very little value to me. This one, or similar to it, plant identification terminology, super boring to read, super boring, but it will tell you all of the definitions of plant parts. The reason why this is important is because these other books are going to say, okay, the difference between this one species and this other species is whether it has an attached petiole, whether it has an obscured petiole, whether the ovary on the flower um, is superior or inferior. And the newbie is going, what? What does all that mean? A book like this tells you, it goes through all of that terminology. So having something that explains plant identification terminology is invaluable. Okay, the next class of books I want to go through, these are not as broadly applicable. But this is a class of books that is really valuable for finding little known factoids about different plants. And those are basically cultural botany resources. So this one, how Indians use wild plants for food, medicine, and crafts. Well, wow, that sounds really exciting. You would think that you're going to jump into this book and it's going to be like, wow, well, this tribe used service berries for something, and this tribe used them for something else, and you're going to get all this tribal knowledge. This particular book is actually only about the Chippewa tribe, and it's like half of a book. I still don't fully understand the origins of this book. It's where it starts out, it kind of jumps in halfway through some larger tome, some larger botanical study that was done that uh, I don't know what the sources of, but it goes through just all kinds of information about how different plants were used by that tribe. And it gets into some really interesting, specific knowledge that's not represented in other books. So other books are going to say, oh, a birch tree, you can use birch bark for an aspirin like effect, and you can use it for this and for that. A book like this, where it's more of a cultural resource specific to a tribe, while in a sense that's more narrow information than what other books will give you, it's deeper information. So it's a narrower breadth of subject matter, but the subject matter dives a lot deeper. And so you find out how the Chippewa tribe used certain plants in very, very specific ways. So these types of books, cultural resource books, are really good for finding that extra information that you don't see elsewhere. The Foxfire books. Foxfire books, it's actually a whole collection of books. This is just one of them, and it's all old and beat up and doesn't have, I guess that is actually the cover. So Foxfire books, they go over a whole bunch of different topics. So this one here covers hog dressing, log cabin building, mountain crafts and foods, planting by the signs, snake lore, hunting tales, faith healing, moonshining, and other affairs of plain living. And every one of the Foxfire books is going to have a whole list of what types of things are discussed there. This is not a book about herbs and plants, but as a cultural resource, you can find these books and you can mine them for the information that they contain. And just like that book that represents Chippewa knowledge of different plants, this represents the knowledge of the people who settled in the Appalachian Mountains. And you'll find uses of different plants in there that you just simply don't find anywhere else. Cloudburst 2, a handbook of rural skills and technology. Well, well, well. Again, it covers a broader scope of things. Not everything is about plants. It's a lot of homesteading skills, but in there you do find knowledge about like how to build your own plant dehydrator, herb dehydrator, all kinds of things like that. So again, cultural resource books are great resources even if they're not specifically about herbs and plants and foraging, they are great books for digging deeper and finding little known knowledge that's not represented in your standard herb books. Now, here's the class of books that is most useful for the forager and for the home herbalist. This is not necessarily for the person who's getting into clinical herbalism, but if you really want to know how to make medicine that is good for your family, good for yourself, and especially you want to be able to go out through your neighborhood or through the forest and find your own medicine, then you get into um, they're not really field guides. I don't know what to call them as a class of books, but they are in a way field guides. They're just not as brief. They give more information. So, for example, this one, blackberry or brambles, which that includes raspberries, tayberry, marionberry, all of those different things. So it gives several pages of information. Oh, got a paper falling out of there. So it gives several pages of information and it gets some into how to identify it. This class of book is not so much about how to identify it. Really, you want your plant ID books to do positive identifications. But they'll give some information about how to identify, and then they'll give information about the different uses, and they'll get much more in depth about the uses than your regular field guides. Field guides are just meant to be light and small. You throw them in your backpack and you take them with you to identify plants. These are larger books that are more thorough. These are ones that you keep in your library. You might take them with you if you're driving out into the woods, and so you're not having to carry them in your backpack, but you're going to have them, in your car. So these are where most people who are getting into family-based herbalism and foraging are going to use this kind of a book. So I got that one. Medicine from the Mountains. This is specifically for the Sierra Nevadas. Since I live in Southern Oregon, the Sierra Nevadas of Oregon are still applicable to my region. My region has a lot of overlap between California and the Pacific Northwest. So, good book. Pacific Northwest medicinal plants. Excellent. Look at that. It's high quality photos. This is what I'm talking about. This category of books, like I said, I don't really know how to categorize this category, but this is a category of books that has um, high quality photos, fairly extensive information on each herb. And also, this type of book is going to have a lot of information on how to make different types of herbal preparations. What is an herbal vinegar versus an herbal tincture? What's the benefit of drying versus freezing versus different types of preparations? What is a tea versus a decoction? These kinds of books go into more of the theory of herbalism, um, or theories or practices of herbalism. So this is where you find a lot of that information on how to process the plants that you're collecting. They're thicker than most field guides. They're definitely larger in size than most field guides, and they have much higher quality pictures and information. Edible wild plants. This is written by a gentleman in Portland, so Northern Oregon. So very applicable to where I live, even though I'm a couple hundred miles away from him. But again, it's a it's a book that provides high quality photos. The focus is not so much on the identification, even though it gives identifying information. Again, the focus is on helping you take plants that you have identified and knowing how to use them. And it gives you the details on how they should be used. It'll get into specific information on different types of herbal qualities. This type of book is going to tell you about, oh, this herb is maybe a warming herb or a cooling herb. It's anti-inflammatory, it's demulcent, it's stomachic. It'll get into all of this terminology. So it's digging deeper into the theories of herbalism or the ideas of herbalism. The Neighborhood Forager, also very good. Again, I'm hoping to do individual reviews on a lot of these books later. Right now, I just want to go over these classes of books, types of books that are helpful. So then we get into books that are doing deep dives into herbalism. So these are not the books that I would recommend that you start out with if you are just now getting going on herbalism and foraging. I would recommend that you start with books about plant identification, that you also use, that you collect some of these books that are more of, I guess they're like consumer facing. They're just really like for the home herbalist. Uh, these types of books are really good if you're just starting out. And then some of the early field guides that just give really short descriptions of plants just to see what plants it is that you should be looking for. But now we're going to look at these. These go into a deeper dive. So, Proven Herbal Remedies. This is a nice old book. I love the old books because a lot of times they will mention things that have just kind of fallen out of mention. And it's not that they're not valid, it's that people have just focused on how this one plant should be used, and they focused on specific uses so much that the narrative has simply lost other uses that people used to apply them for. So sometimes those older books. But the point is that this dives in really deep. This does not give you pictures of the plants. It does not tell you how to identify them. This is telling you, oh, Here's how you form dosages. This is how you create your formulas. This is the types of qualities you can expect from this herb. So, uh, impotence and irritation of urinary organs. Well, that sounds pretty intriguing. So, plant Buragokaru. Okay, sounds like it would do the job. And the Latin name is Pedalium murex. Now I'm wondering if it'll really do the job or not. A name like that, I don't know. Where found? India. So obviously I'm not gonna wildcraft it here in my neighborhood. I'll have to buy this if I need some help with ED. Parts used, seeds. Well, that's good because at least I don't have to buy a whole plant. Action, antispasmodic, demulcent, diuretic. Now that sounds like Latin or Greek, pretty much because it is Latin and Greek. And these are the words that tell you what the actions are that these herbs take. And you can study out what each of those words mean. Obviously, antispasmodic means that it works against spasms. And then dissertation has been used in incontinence of urine, gleat, nocturnal emissions, impotence, and irritation of urinary organs. Method infusion 1 in 20. And then the book will tell you what it means when it's talking about 1 in 20 infusions. Dosage, several doses every day. So it gives you that level of information. It kind of dives deep into what you need to know for real herbal medicinal applications. This book is along those lines, although it's a broader variety of topics, vitamins, minerals, and herbs. But this is again a very kind of scholastic book. I guess that's what this class maybe could be called, is the scholastic books. It's not drawings, it's not color photos, it's not telling you how to identify them. This is saying, okay, assuming that you already know what these herbs are, here's deep, useful information of how you can apply them. Then herbal antivirals. For some reason, I couldn't find it. I have the companion book or herbal antibiotics. These are amazing books, absolutely science based. Stephen Herod Buhner does awesome research, and he knows his stuff when he writes these books. These are top quality books. Again, very scholastic, very scholarly. These books are not for identifying plants. They don't have any glossy photos. They're just diving deep into what types of things, plant chemistry, yeah, just all kinds of stuff. So the scholastic or the scholarly books, those are not what I recommend for people who are just getting started. Um, Now, you can get them, and that's fine. But usually, if you're just getting started, a lot of the terminology in those books are not going to make sense yet. I would really recommend, if you're just getting started, that you first just learn what the plants are around you and the basic uses of them. Learn that Usnea lichen stops bleeding. You don't need to learn all of the chemical constituents. You don't need to learn all of the actions or all of these different things about it. You can learn that it stops bleeding, and that's enough to start with. Learn that yarrow helps women with heavy periods, and a nice yarrow tea can be very useful for that. So learn these types of things when you're just getting started, and then as you grow in your knowledge, then you'll develop. Um, Basically, you'll grow into some of the other types of books. Okay. And then we have books that also tend to be very deep, very scholarly, but they are specific. The books I just showed you, they just go through a whole range of different herbs. Then you get into very specific books. If you need to know about men's issues, the male herbal, very specific there. Healing Lyme. Are you dealing with Lyme disease? Are your friends or family members dealing with Lyme disease? Very, very specific. Um, this one actually should have been in the previous category. Actually, all three of these should have been in the previous category of general scholarly books. There's Earl Mendel's Herb Bible, The Way of Herbs, the Modern Herbal Dispensatory. These books are all just general, where you can look up hundreds of different types of herbs, see how they're used, how they're not used, contraindications, etc. Again, I don't recommend those for the beginner. They're still great. If you have an opportunity to buy them, they're great. But really, you want to start out with kind of some lighter reading. Speaking of lighter reading, if you're getting into foraging, How to Die in the Woods. Yes, How to Die in the Woods. This will give you all kinds of things. Cramped by constipation, crunched by crocodile, electric eel, the shocking truth, heat stroke, too hot to handle, harassed by hippopotamus. So, excellent book right there. If you really want to learn how to die in the woods, do that. I strongly recommend anything by Patrick McManus, especially The Night That Buried Goomba. This is necessary reading for anybody who's going to be spending time in the outdoors. These books have almost nothing to do with herbs. But by the time you're done looking at all of these other books about herbs and plants and all that stuff, you're going to need some light reading. Finally, I'm going to end with books that are specific to a single herb. These are really to be purchased only when you want to learn about that targeted herb. St. John's wort, this one, It Will Live Forever, it's about processing acorns and olive leaf extract. So those are my recommendations, or those are my thoughts. Different categories of books. If you're starting out, I do highly recommend that you start out with the books that are much more like field guides, good glossy pictures, um, um, that really explain your basic food uses and your basic medicinal uses. Don't worry about getting the books that dive deep into herbalism and every last bit of knowledge about it. Now, you will identify some herbs along the way where you say, wow, this one is of particular interest to me, or oh, it says that this herb can be used for that. Then you're going to do a deep dive into those specific herbs and those specific uses because they make sense to you or they call to you. You're like, oh, I need to know that knowledge. But really, for getting going, use the field guides, use the ones with the glossy pictures. I hope that this video helps. Also, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have any books that you like that you want to recommend, please let me know that as well because I hope to make further videos. And thank you all for watching, and God bless.